What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and today we are talking state of the Hoosiers. But before we get to my guest, make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, get that viewership going. But without further ado, Sammy Jacobs joins us from the Hoosier Huddle. Sammy, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, anytime. Football season's right. We're like less than 2 weeks to week zero. So, anytime we come on, talk Big Ten and Indiana football, it's great.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be excited about. The listeners know I just had actually a JMU friend who works for JMU. She was actually telling me a lot about behind the scenes stuff just with student athletes, and she was talking about Curt Cignetti and the juice he's bringing. So a lot of excitement at Indiana. Before we kind of get into that, though, the Hoosier Huddle. I know when we talked on the Big Ten Huddle, Hoosier Huddle's been around for a while. Tell us how
Yep.
you got started and like how you've grown as a podcast and as an entity, because it's not just podcast. It's like all across the map in journalism and whatnot. So kind of give us how you got into it and how it's grown.
So we started as a website. Me and my buddy, lifelong friend, he ended up going to Ohio State. I went to IU, reconnected in college, but we're both diehard college football fans. And I went to grad school up in Buffalo, and at that time, we're like, man, let's start a college football blog on IU. Now nobody covered, like, the theory behind it was we're only football. We don't cover basketball or any other sport. We're football only, and it's because when we started in 2013, nobody covered the team. Like, the coverage was so different. It was maybe a couple Indy Star articles, a couple from 247, but we wanted to cover the team how we as fans would want it covered. And so, started the site. Podcast came on a year later when we got credentialed and started to go to games and make connections and stuff like that. But yeah, it is turned into a lot of other things. I'm the statistician for the radio broadcast. It turned into
Wow.
that. And then all these different shows, call-in shows on Sirius XM and all that stuff that have come, and it's turned into a big thing. We also have an internship program through IU, so we have a couple writers every year who come on and work for us and create content and all that stuff.
That's incredible. So, I mean, you guys have really dipped into a number of different pots in the Indiana pro athletic program. Like you've got writers, you've got call-in shows, podcast, website, and you've been doing this for 11 years. Just incredible what you guys are doing. And you're an elementary school teacher to boot. So you are busy this fall.
Yes, and with the newborn, so it's extra super busy. I know no free advertising, but I am living off of Celsius right now.
There you
So
go.
you know,
This podcast brought to you by Celsius. No,
yep.
you are doing very well for a sleep. I'm sure a sleep deprived man working multiple jobs right now. So well done.
Thank you.
Well, and part of that, you're somewhat powered by Celsius. I think you're probably powered a little bit by the juice coming off of Curt Cignetti. But before him, Tom Allen was the head man. And I remember when he first took the job, it was a rough couple of years. And then 2019, it seemed like he turned a corner, right? 8-5. Then the COVID year where he shocked a lot of us. Ohio State came this close to losing to the Hoosiers in what was a top 10 matchup. And, I think after 2020 and Michael Penix, you thought, wow, Tom Allen's ready to take this team to new heights. And then it just crumbled. What happened? What changed in the program from 2019 and 2020 to the rest of Tom Allen's tenure?
I mean, that's what is it, $15.5 million question? His buyout is what happened.
Yeah.
Well, you go back to the start of it. the end of the Kevin Wilson era. They're coming off of 2 bowl games. Wilson gets let go right before that 2016 bowl. Tom Allen's named interim head coach with no national search, which kind of divided the fan base anyway. He comes in, they lose the Foster Farms Bowl. Then the first 2 seasons, he had 5-7 and 5-7, and you're sitting there needing wins against Purdue to go to a bowl game. You win either of those games. Now you're talking 3 bowls in 4 years, or even 4 straight bowl games heading into 2019, and you really got this thing rolling. I think where it goes wrong is, against Maryland in 2020, Michael Penix blows out his knee again. And I think that's Thanksgiving weekend of 2020. And they may have rushed him back too early in terms of, look, he started the season opener at Iowa in September of that year. That's about 9 months to recover from ACL surgery, which, technology has gotten better and all that stuff, but that is, it still takes about a full year. And you saw when Michael Penix is healthy and you have an offensive line who's functional in front of him, what he could do. And he's a special player. So that happened. And then, second play from Iowa is a pick 6 on offense. And it's, I think 2.5 minutes into that game, you're in there ranked 16th in the country. You're down 14-0 to Iowa. So things got off the rails. And if you want to look at the turning point, if you go to that Cincinnati game in 2021, IU had them on the ropes. Micah McFadden gets ejected. Air goes out of the stadium. You end up losing that game. IU goes 2-10 and really never recovers. Penix hits the transfer portal. You kind of miss on Connor Bazelak. And then Brandon Sorsby, Taven Jackson were 2 redshirt freshmen who had no playing experience, basically, maybe 3.5 games told you. And it just fell apart. And then there was no juice in terms of NIL. I think that was a big turning point too. It was, I don't think the transition to be from Tom Allen's a really good defensive coach. And, he had 2 really good seasons as head coach, and then you bring in NIL, and it was maybe too much on his plate in terms of being the general manager of the program. And we've seen it. We've seen it. Chip Kelly left UCLA to become an offensive coordinator. Some people just can't handle it. But, they just never took advantage of those 2 years in 19 and 20.
Yeah. One thing I mentioned when Tom Allen took the Penn State job was I thought it was such a good hire and a great replacement for Manny Diaz, who obviously left to go to Duke. And I think people forget how good of a defensive coach Tom Allen is. But I really appreciate the perspective. The head coaching job has gotten so much harder at every program, and especially at a place like Indiana. I'm sure Ohio State and Michigan, they may have stumbles with NIL and whatnot, but Indiana really has to sell itself in a different way, I'm sure.
You got to sell yourself to the fan base at Indiana too, and that's part of the problem. Is for decades and decades you've been it's not even second fiddle, it's like 8th fiddle at IU, and to go and ask alumni and fans to give hard-earned money to maybe get a football player was hard, especially when you get nothing in return. That's some of the problem with NIL is what is this guy doing for me? Whereas if you're donating to the varsity club or something, you at least get priority points, or they'll send you a t-shirt or whatever. You get better seats, depending on what you donate. But and NIL I think helped St. Gallen too. And then it just never improved. He's stuck with some assistant coaches too long, like Darren Hiller in the offensive line. He totally swung and missed with Walt Bell, an offensive coordinator. And then injuries. You were starting to walk on quarterback against Purdue at the end of the year. So
So just a lot of unfortunate events. There's an episode in the future that it'd be fun to think about, like the butterfly effect if Indiana beat Cincinnati in 2021, because there's a lot of implications there if that happens. But that's for another discussion. Has Curt? I mean, Curt Cignetti's coming in with a lot of juice. What are you seeing out of him and his coaching staff? Like, what about him makes a good fit for the Hoosiers?
I think it's because he's not an IU guy. He's
Really?
not he's not an Indiana guy. He has no ties to Indiana other than he coached NC State when they played there when Philip Rivers was quarterback. He the in-state perspective on IU football is that they stink. They're always going to stink, and they always have stunk. So I think having somebody like Curt Cignetti come in who hasn't been around that is not going to let that come into his, atmosphere in the team, and have that confidence, saying, "Look, BS. We want to be the best." I'm going to call baloney when they say, "Oh, well, we'll be happy with 10th." Sure, but our goal isn't to be 10th; it's to be the best, and I think that helps. He does have some guys on his staff with Indiana ties, but it's not. You got out of that mold of we need an Indiana guy like basketball. That it's the same. Like Mike Woodson was hired because he's an Indiana guy. He's a Bob Knight player and all that stuff.
Right.
And I think they stepped out of that mold, and I think that's what needed to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think to that point, like JMU, like under Curt Cignetti, was just they were dynamic. They won a lot of games. I mean, you look at the FCS, they won a champ, or they got to the national championship game once, got to the semifinals twice, and then in the Sun Belt, won a share of the conference championship both years. And so he's not coming in to play, second fiddle. Which talk a little bit about the press conference, or it was at the basketball arena where he talked about Purdue sucks and Ohio State and Michigan suck too. Like, talk about what did that do for the fan base?
I mean, it fired them up. I mean, a lot of people question why would you do that? And aren't you going to make Ohio State and Michigan mad? And my thinking is, they've kicked your butt for 80 years. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Okay. So you say they stink, and they get mad. What are they going to beat you 70-0? Or like, come on, you got to fire up the fan base somehow, and it's again that thinking that it hasn't been around Indiana football.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You can see at Big Ten Media Days, I saw a few interviews with Indiana players, and like you can tell, like there's a lot of juice with the players. Like the mentality is changing. Has that obviously it's early returns? Has that helped with NIL? Has that helped kind of galvanize the fan base to give?
I think so. And like nothing official here, but it seemed like the last few years under Allen, they didn't make an effort to push people to donate. But since Cignetti has been the head coach, they've made a push. They've done, I know the Hoosier Collective is Hoosiers Connect. They've done a vodka, bourbon. They've done different fundraising things. They sell merchandise. So I think the push is there now under Curt Cignetti because he wasn't going to come if NIL wasn't in place.
Yeah. So it seems like it's a little bit of both. Like Cignetti knew that Indiana had to start stepping up, and Cignetti is really lighting the fire to really galvanize it into existence. Which that's great because it sounds like Indiana and Curt Cignetti are really on the same page and advancing the program forward.
You hope so. And I think, you have somebody now who knows and understands the sport of college football and where it's headed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I hate where it's headed, I do.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, that's where it's going. And that's reality, is that football is going to drive everything. And if
Mhm.
you're stinking football and not generating money at football, you could kiss every other sport goodbye, and you're
Yeah.
going to end up on the wayside in some tier 3 division that nobody cares about.
Right. Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about how Indiana's gonna get like, not be in that tier 3, because I think there's a lot of changes coming to Indiana, not just with the coaching staff, but with the roster. Um, before we talk about the newcomers, there are some players on this roster that are really good now that have been there. Who are some of these guys that are returning that we need to keep our eyes on?
But the number one guy is Donovan McCulley, and he
Mm,
really came on at the end of last year. He's 6'5" wide receiver. He's former quarterback, can jump out of the gym, and really started to make plays that he should make as a dominant receiver on offense. On defense, Linnell Carr is probably the returning guy
mm,
who's makes the most impact on there. Is the rush edge. He led the team in sacks last year, and he's back. Uh, Now they're replacing like 50 some odd players. So there's not a lot of returning guys to talk about, but offensive linemen, two offensive linemen. If you're into watching the offensive line, Mike Kadick at center, he's a 6-year guy, and Carter Smith, who's a true sophomore, who played really well last year. He went into the portal, came back to IU, or two other guys to keep an eye on. But outside of that, man, Taven Jackson, quarterback, he's probably starting the year at second string, but he's back. Omar Cooper, a wide receiver, nobody really talks about him. He
mm.
started to make big plays. He got rolled up on in the Wisconsin win last year and was out the rest of the year. But he was a 4-star receiver from Lawrence North in Indianapolis. He's been playing well. So there are a few guys.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and there's a few returning guys. There's a load of newcomers
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of exciting guys. Obviously Curtis Rourke being one of the top ones. You mentioned Taven Jackson probably being second string. Curtis Rourke's the reason why he's probably second string. Talk about what he brings to the table and what particularly why is he an upgrade to Taven Jackson and Sorsby from a year ago?
Well, it's all about experience. Curtis Rourke is coming in as a 6-year guy. He was the 2022 MAC Player of the Year. He has all the tools. He can run and get you first down and touchdown if you need it. He can throw the ball all over the field, but it's those 6 years of experience. And that's something that IU hasn't had at quarterback, even with Michael Penix. You know,
Mm,
you had Peyton Ramsey in 2019 who played a lot of football for IU, but you look at Michael Penix and yeah, he played a handful of games those years, but he never played against Purdue.
mm,
Never, and he wouldn't have played against them if that game had been played in 2020. So he never made it through a season healthy. And then after that, Jack Tuttle really never had experience on the field. Brandon Sorsby had a half a game. He's starting as a redshirt freshman. Taven Jackson had 3 games at Tennessee, so he's bringing game experience that IU really hasn't had at that position since 2019 or
mhm.
2018. If you want to go into the year with the starting quarterback,
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, 33 starts, 50 touchdowns, a 16 interception ratio. Like, dude's a baller and he can run. Um, because of that experience, like, how do you think that elevates this offense? Because I think a lot of people, when they think of Indiana offense the past few years, it hasn't been very productive. Obviously, experience helps it move, but like, what in particular do you think he helps elevate for the Hoosiers?
they're making the right decision. I mean, experience in making the right read, making the right throw. And look, some of it might be helped with helmet communications this year, but getting people in the right places at the right time and
Mm.
knowing how to operate the offense when it needs to be operated in a certain way. And look, Brandon Sorsby played really well down the stretch last year for IU, but there were times when he made throws that he probably shouldn't have made, um, or made checks that he probably should have checked out of, and things like that. So it's you have when Curt Cignetti says he sleeps better because Curtis Rourke is on his roster, the dude is pretty special.
Yeah. And that's high praise, to say you can sleep well at night. There's a lot of other guys that probably help Coach Cignetti sleep well at night as well. Guys like Kalen Black, Elijah Surratt. Talk about some of these other newcomers and what they bring to the table.
There are a lot of newcomers, and the fan base at Indiana's been joking, and people have been joking that they're like the G5 All-Star team. You get all of these, and it's not only the Sun Belt. Otherwise, it'd be like the All Sun Belt team, like one of those video game All-Star teams that you pick out. But you're bringing in, and Curt Cignetti's philosophy was he wanted production over potential. And these guys have been productive at the G5 level coming up to Power 4. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder. Elijah Surratt was a 1,000-yard receiver. He's very dependable, great route runner. He's not going to burn you down the field, with his speed, but he's got crisp route runs, and he has great hands. So he'll be a good addition. You're bringing in Miles Price from Texas Tech, who's that speedster to go in the slot. As well, you bring in Miles Cross from Ohio, who has that repertoire with Curtis Rourke, and then the running back room is really good. I really think the running back room has been upgraded this year. You bring in 4 different guys; they all have speed to get to the outside. Some of them can run in the middle. I think this might be you feed the hand who's the hottest at that time. I don't think there'll be a bell cow back. But that doesn't happen anymore. Nobody's carrying the ball for 35 times a game. But yeah, you're going to have a bunch of guys get a bunch of carries back there. Zach Horton, the tight end, he's a real player. Was really good at JMU. And then I think on the offensive line, you bring in Trey Wedig from Wisconsin, who could play all over the line. That reinforces it. He'll probably start at right tackle. But he's a guy, if somebody goes down somewhere else, you can plug in your backup right tackle and move him over. And then Nick Kidwell and Tyler Stevens as well from JMU are 2 guys who played a ton on the offensive line who reinforce that position. Man, who else am I missing on offense? There's just a ton of guys that they came in over.
Well, I knew you guys had a lot of newcomers. When you said 50, and it's
that's
funny.
That's including high school recruits. They had 31 transfers come in.
It's insane. Well, and it's the person I was talking to, her name's Faith. I was talking to her, and she said that they had 44 new players at JMU, which is it's the new world of college football. But so anyway, keep going, because we know you have like 20 other names that you have to drop here.
Yeah, defensively, again, a lot of JMU guys. Mikel Kamara comes over, defensive lineman who's really good. James Carpenter, defensive tackle. I don't know if he starts or starts and then rotates in. He's a little undersized for the Big Ten, but former walk-on guy who was an second team All Sun Belt, gets a ton of tackles for loss and things like that. So he's a high motor guy. You bring in CJ West from Kent State. He was probably the biggest pull on the defensive line. A lot of guys wanted him. And then the secondary had to be totally rebuilt. You bring in D'Angelo Pons, who's having a great fall camp. He was a freshman All-American at JMU. He's been really impressive in fall practice. You bring in Sedarius Doss from Austin P, who was an FCS All-American. Get what I'm saying? The G5 All-Stars. So, and then at safety, you have, I always mess up his name, Tony Jones or Terry Jones. I think it's Terry Jones. Terry Jones. You bring in Sean Ashbury as well from Old Dominion. Those guys could play well. Ashbury I think he was the one with the pick six that got called back on a false
Mm,
start or whatever in the spring game, but it was a nice pick.
yeah.
And then, you bring Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, probably your two starting linebackers, who were the two starting linebackers at JMU. You bring in Najee Logan from UMass, who was their leading tackler,
Hmm.
as a depth piece. And yeah, I know I'm missing some guys in there, but it's like a whole new team. It really is a new world of college football, where you have to have your media guide ready to go.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Like you have so many, like the group of five all stars, but you do have some key pieces. Donovan McCulley is a guy who's gonna, as you mentioned, is gonna be explosive for them, and you've got a couple of anchor pieces on that line. I think Mike Kadick is the guy I was listening to in an interview on Kings of the North podcast, and you can tell from his posture what their their positivity and their belief in themselves really has brought to this team. So it'll be interesting because you have the foundation set with some of these Indiana guys, but then you have a lot of these really good players from mid-major levels coming in. It's an interesting mix that I'm not sure anyone in the Big Ten's ever done before. So it'll
No,
be interesting to see.
yeah, you have the guys who have been at IU who know how the Big Ten works. Then you have the guys from JMU who know how Curt Cignetti and his culture works. So they might come in and be the cornerstones of your program, is to get those guys who are have stunk the last 3 years at IU, or the team stunk, and bring in that, hey, we're here to win.
Yeah.
And that mentality should help. And then you bring in some talented guys from the other group of five, and some Power Five guys too, like Justice Ellison at running back and Elijah Green. They went to Wake Forest and UNC respectively. So I think it is a interesting mix, and we'll see how it works.
Yeah. Well, and with how it works, if you look at Indiana's schedule, it really is a tale of two different seasons, it feels like. Because the first 6 weeks, FIU, Western Illinois, at UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, at Northwestern. And then you guys have a bye week. And then it's Nebraska, Washington, at Michigan State, Michigan, at Ohio State, and the rivalry game, Old Oaken Bucket with Purdue.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, like not that there aren't hurdles in the first 6 games, like there's certainly some toss-ups there, but you can contrast that to that back half of the schedule, and that, like, it just feels like two very different worlds. Talk about that for a minute, just how Indiana has to prepare for that, and then maybe what does Indiana have to do in the first 6 games to get to a bowl game by the end of the season?
Yeah. So I mean, it's odd starting off with FIU. Because IU has opened up with Penn State, Iowa, Ohio State. A lot of Big Ten in 2017 was Ohio State again.
Mhm.
So, you have some runway to build some confidence here. And I think that's huge for a new coach. It's something that, Tom Allen didn't get. It's something that um, maybe Kevin Wilson didn't really get, too. But yeah, you go, if you could go 4-2 in those first 6 games and really start off quickly, you're going to get this fan base behind you. And if you could get to 4-2, and then Nebraska's after that bye week, which is it's homecoming, you should have a large crowd. And who knows what Nebraska's going to be? They could be better. They could be what Nebraska's been for about a decade now.
Right.
So who knows? And then and those UCLA and Northwestern, those road games are gettable.
Mhm.
Northwestern catch lightning in a bottle last year, and UCLA is going through their own coaching change, and they play LSU the next week, and and all that stuff. And then the back half of the schedule, it's one of those odd years where you have 2 bye weeks. So IU gets that second bye between Michigan and Ohio State, which is a break. Um, you know, Unfortunately, IU has to play Michigan and Ohio State again. They didn't get Rutgers luck,
Right. Yeah.
and stuff like that. But Washington's going through some changes. You get them at home. That
Mhm.
could be one of those 9 a.m. body clock kicks for a West Coast team. That you know the only game where you're like, man, don't know if they have a shot is at Ohio State. And who knows what Michigan's going to be. You could put them in that category too. But who knows with all this off the field stuff and distractions and who's their
Mhm.
quarterback and who's going to be coaching and all that stuff. That game's at home. And I'm not saying that they're going to go 10-11-1 or 10-2, but it sets up to get off to a hot start. And if you win some of these toss-up games, you could be in a bowl before Purdue.
Yeah. I appreciate 4-2 because I think at first glance, when I look at that second half, I'm like, man, that's just really tough. But you make some good points. We don't know about Nebraska.
Same with
Like,
Michigan State. I forgot them
yeah.
too.
Yeah. And Michigan State, I feel like is in a similar position to Indiana, except I think they got splashier names, but I don't think they got nearly as many.
Well, you have
And
Aiden Childs has played in like 9 games, has thrown 35 passes.
yeah,
So who are you
it
Who are you
is
rolling
different.
with to rebuild your program? Curtis Rourke or maybe a hyped up 4-star?
Yeah. Well, and it's just similar with Nebraska. Like it's most likely Dylan Raiola, or you have
Yep.
a seasoned vet. And even Washington, uh, Washington's so hard to figure out because their whole team is like gone.
Yeah, if
And
their
so
offensive line is functional, they'll be fine.
yeah, I think
I mean,
Washington will be better.
fine being like 8 wins, not 14 and
Yeah.
one and going to the playoff and all that stuff.
Yeah. But I think what you're saying, Sammy, with that is like it's not like Ohio State, Michigan are Ohio State, Michigan. But even that, like 4-2 in the first half can set them up well, and they could do better than 4-2.
Yes. 4-2. I think 4-2 is like the minimum you got to do to where you could feel, hey, all we need is Michigan State and Purdue. And
Yeah.
if you could steal one against all the rest, then you have a little bit. 4-2 gives you a margin for error.
Yeah.
3-3, you're cutting it close. 2-4 is a disaster. 1-4, just cancel the rest of the season. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and 0-6 is just.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
a terrible stuff. Well, in many ways, Indiana is where Rutgers was a year ago, where like Rutgers, the first half of their season was like you have to hit the layups to get bowl eligible,
Yep.
and then then it's like it's going to be a rough ride the second half, but they wrote it out, and I think that Indiana has the right coach, the right the roster's been rebuilt. And so I think there's some really fun times coming for Hoosier fans. So
Yeah, it should be a good year, and Rutgers could be a sleeper in the Big Ten this year too. They don't play any of the top 5 teams. They're tough as nails. That's not a knock on Rutgers. They are a tough as nails Greg Schiano team who will
yeah,
kick your butt, and that's what they did last year. And they hit their layups. They were contested at times,
yes,
but they got there, and then they kicked Miami's butt in the Pinstripe Bowl. So yeah, it's get to 4-2 and see where you land after that.
yeah, yeah. Very cool. Well, let me get you out on this. I ask everyone who's come on this show representing their team, their fan base, if we're coming to a game, where we got to eat.
Oh man, there are a lot of great places to eat in Bloomington, and it depends what you're in the mood for. If you want pizza, Italian food, first of all, football game, you just need the tailgate. Bring your own food and tailgate. But
There you
if you're
go.
in there for the weekend and want to eat someplace Friday night, if you want a steak, go to Little Zagreb's. Make sure you call early, make reservations because that place is packed on game day weekends. If you want pizza, go to Mother Bear's. And if you just want a good time with some good food, go to Nick's.
Nick's.
Place Sink the Biz, get the Biz fries, Stromboli. There are a ton of good places in Bloomington.
Nice. Okay, real quick. What's your take on the tenderloin? Do you feel like it's good, overrated? I know it's like an Indiana staple.
I like it. It took a little while to get used to how much bigger it was than the bun, but that's like the thing. I'm not an Indiana native. I'm from New York. So coming out
Okay,
here,
yeah.
it's like, okay, you give me like the little sloppy Joe burger bun and this giant tenderloin is like, how the hell am I supposed to eat this? But yeah, you throw some pickles, some mustard on it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't realize you were from New York. It says a lot that you recommend a pizza place in the Midwest as a New Yorker. So like that, to me, that says something.
Look, if
So
you have the means to FedEx frozen pizza from New York to your place in Bloomington, I would do that instead. But if you want good Bloomington pizza, Mother Bear's is pretty good.
there you go. There you go. I can appreciate that sentiment being in Pennsylvania. Oh man, cool. Well, Sammy, if we wanted to find you and follow your content, where can we do that?
Yeah, we're on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Hoosier_Huddle. And then our website's HoosierHuddle.com. We put all our stuff up on there. We have a YouTube page as well, but everything's posted on there. You can subscribe to so we do our podcast on YouTube, and it's on audio only on Spotify, Apple Music, and all those things. So, come, chat it up, hit it up, read our stuff. We're going through our countdown to kickoff now through every player on the roster. We're doing our position previews, our game opponent previews as well. So we have, 2 or 3 pieces of content coming out every day now until kickoff.
Yeah. So if you want to learn everything you can about Indiana, go over to Hoosier Huddle, listen to their stuff. And you're on X. Yeah, you're on X as well. So follow them everywhere that you can. Yeah, thank you so much, Sammy, for coming on and educating us about what I think is going to be a fun team to follow in the Big Ten this year.
Hopefully it's more fun than it has been the last 3 years, and you get a new look Big Ten, some fun road trips as well, playing on the lake at Northwestern, and then out in the Rose Bowl at UCLA. So it's
that venue. I mean, I'd love to go just for the Rose Bowl, but when Ohio State goes out to play at UCLA, I'm like, it's probably not a wise financial decision, but flying out there to see a game in that stadium is like bucket list right there.
Well, Learfield pays for the flight, so it's not too bad of a financial decision for me.
There you go. There you go. Well, Sammy, thanks again for joining us.
Yep, anytime. Thanks, Zach.
For sure. For the rest of you, take care. God bless.